Continuing our series now of Kevin Doran shows. Kevin Doran in September of 2013, before the Mueller report, before Donald Trump was in the White House, Kevin Doran was interviewing Jerome Corsi, not on the topic of Donald Trump, but on the topic of President John Kennedy's death. And this is from, again, September of 2013. Kevin Doran's interview with Jerome Corsi on that topic.
It's been a long time since President John Kennedy was killed in Dallas, and we all know that the majority of Americans do not accept the Warren report. Well, we have a gentleman on the program today for whom I have the highest respect, Dr. Jerome Corsi, Ph.D., Harvard. This book, Who Really Killed Kennedy, 50 years later. And Dr. Corsi is my guest today, and it's always a privilege to talk to him. Stay tuned.
Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
Okay, Dr. Jerome Corsi, my guest today on the Newsmaker Show. Dr. Corsi, it's always a privilege to talk to you. Well, let's talk about Jack Kennedy.
Right.
I'm not going to get in your way much because I know you cover a lot of issues in this book, so take off and go.
Well, first of all, the American people have continued to remain, it's a mystery. It's a huge mystery, and I think we can basically begin solving it. And it is current to our politics, because what I'm going to explain is that the reasons Jack Kennedy was killed are part of our current politics today. Wars in Syria, wars in Iran, wars in Afghanistan, hopefully not Iran, but it's possible. At any rate, the book begins by showing that there was no way Lee Harvey Oswald could have alone killed Jack Kennedy. And the basic understanding is that the ballistics evidence from Parkland Hospital, where Jack Kennedy was brought immediately after the shooting in Dallas, the wounds were seen as front entry wounds. The neck wound was a puncture wound to his throat. That was a front entry wound. The head, Jack Kennedy's back of his head was blown out, which was an exit wound, meaning the shot had to come from the front. The doctors at Parkland were clear about that. And if you take a look at the Bethesda autopsy that was done later that night, it's also clear that the doctors never established a path between the back wound, it's a shallow wound only about a quarter of an inch into the body, and the neck wound, for which no exit was found for the bullet. So, the idea of a single bullet theory, which depends on the bullet having passed through Jack Kennedy's back, going through his neck and then hitting Governor Connolly and doing massive damage to Governor Connolly, the medical evidence required to establish that theory was never produced at the autopsy. And that's fundamental to understand. Also, when you look at the assassination, I began raising the more general question of who was really behind it, not just the shooters. There's more than one shooter involved.
Did Oswald shoot, by the way?
No, Oswald, I don't think fired a shot. I think Oswald said he didn't. He said he did not even own a rifle. I think the rifle was bought in his name without his knowledge. 3 wallets with all this identification showed up for Oswald on the scene. People don't realize that, and it sure looks to me like a plant to make sure that Oswald was identified with the name Hidell. At any rate, Oswald said he was found in the second-floor lunchroom. Dallas police found Oswald there together with one of the building managers, and I don't think Oswald, I think he was told to go there and wait, and that's what he did. I think Oswald was an agent working with the U.S. government. The Warren Commission suppressed the information that the month, that time when Jack Kennedy was killed, Lee Harvey Oswald was on the payroll of the FBI as an informant, and had a complete CIA file that goes back to 1957, which was the false defector program. Oswald evidently was part of a program to encourage soldiers to defect to Russia as if they wanted to renounce their citizenship in order to implant them with within the Soviet Union and get contact with the KGB. And so that's not known. And the Warren Commission, there's a report from the chief counsel of the commission saying, what are we going to do? We found out this information about Lee Harvey Oswald being a government agent. And the Warren Commission decided to suppress the information and lie about it. And that was a key tip-off that the Warren Commission was a cover-up, and you have to start then beginning asking the broader questions of who really killed JFK, not just who pulled the trigger, but who put the assassins in the field.
Okay. Now, you will certainly recall, and maybe our listeners will, that Oswald's mother, we only saw her when her son was killed. We don't know what she was really like. She got rather hysterical, understandably. But she said, my son works for the CIA, and Oswald himself said, I'm a patsy. Now, those are interesting terms. He worked for the CIA, and Oswald said, I'm a patsy, meaning I've been set up to take the hit.
And, in fact, that's the case. That's what happened. Oswald was telling the truth, and his mother was telling the truth. That's what the documentary evidence shows. The unraveling the JFK assassination requires going back and realizing it started with the Bay of Pigs invasion in Kennedy's term when we invaded Cuba, and it was a fiasco. Kennedy had to pull the plug. He realized the CIA had lied to him, had concocted this crazy scheme to invade Cuba, and the point was to force Jack Kennedy, rather than to let the invaders die on the beaches, to have a military attack, to launch the Navy fighters from an aircraft carrier offshore Cuba, and Jack Kennedy refused to do it. That was critical. Kennedy realized he'd been lied to. He wasn't going to play the CIA's game, and he fired Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, right after the Bay of Pigs. I say in the book that's when Jack Kennedy signed his death warrant, because Allen Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles, who was head of the State Department, he was Secretary of State under the Eisenhower administration, these were two fundamental figures in U.S. foreign policy going back to before World War II, and Dulles and both the Dulles brothers were about creating this new world order, which is what they called it even at that time. And Jack Kennedy was not going to play along. He was not going to fight a war for a CIA lie that was really about not freedom in Cuba, but was about the economic interests of the United States gaining control of Cuba, and the military interests wanting to beat communist influence in the hemisphere.
Okay, so the CIA, according to you then, is in this plot to get rid of Kennedy.
Correct. The CIA plotted, and it goes back, I show in the book, the original plot was developed under the Eisenhower administration in Guatemala, where we removed a head of state, E. Howard Hunt, was involved in putting together this fake army that supposedly invaded Guatemala it was a CIA army. It wasn't there to get freedom. And when we assassinated the head of Guatemala, it was done by the CIA, and it was a false flag. We had a patsy. They said he was assassinated by the Palace Guard. Of course, the Palace Guard, then the CIA said, well, he committed suicide immediately, so the patsy was dead and there was no investigation. And the CIA with Guatemala had developed a pattern, a coup d'etat, where you would kill the head of state, and a patsy would be blamed for the murder.
Okay, so this followed the pattern of what they've done in Guatemala. Yeah. Right. We have to take a break. Stay tuned.
What's a Zoom room? It's what your conference room is meant to be, with flawless video and audio conferencing, instant wireless content sharing from any device, and just one tap of a button to start a meeting. Any space can easily become a modern, simple-to-use Zoom room, from huddle rooms to executive offices to huge training rooms. And whether you have a few rooms or a few thousand, Zoom Rooms is effortlessly scalable. Sign up online for a free 30-day trial of Zoom Rooms and meet happy with Zoom.
Well, one day after Christmas, December 26, 2019, now checking in with meteorologist Gary Best for the forecast. How's it looking, Gary?
Well, I'll tell you, Brian, it doesn't look all that bad for the next couple of days. At least the temperatures are going to be mild. It's not going to feel like late December, as above normal temperatures will continue, but we will get some December cold as we move into early next week. In the meantime, through today, we had a sunrise a little while ago at 7:40 a.m. It'll set at 4:43 p.m. today, and we'll have partly sunny to occasionally cloudy sky conditions out there. Temperatures up to about 50 this afternoon. Tonight, low 40s, breezy with a few light showers passing through, and mostly cloudy with scattered showers ending on Friday. And again, fairly mild, low 50s on Friday afternoon. Friday night, partly to mostly cloudy, low to mid-30s, and partly sunny, just a bit cooler on Saturday, mostly in the 40s. But we head back up in the 50s on Sunday with a chance of rain, and rain showers may become snow showers on Monday as it turns windy and colder then.
On today's Newsmaker show, we hear Kevin Doran in 2013 interviewing Dr. Jerome Corsi. What Corsi is basically outlining here is what New Orleans, Louisiana District Attorney Jim Garrison tried to argue back in the late 1960s in the case against New Orleans businessman Clay Shaw, that Shaw was hanging around Lee Harvey Oswald, that Shaw had CIA ties, that the whole thing was kind of strange, that all these Bay of Pigs type characters and big businessmen and intelligence agents were hanging around Oswald up until the point that Kennedy gets shot. Of course, he basically has the same argument here. We continue the show now from September 2013. Kevin Doran and Jerome Corsi.
We're back with Dr. Jerome Corsi, author of a new book on Kennedy, Who Really Killed Kennedy.
This is the 50th anniversary. The book is selling quite well.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
It's in the top. It's in the top 100 on Amazon right now, and I think it's going to have a strong sales all the way through the November 22nd. The reviews are saying, are really raving about the book.
Good.
That it really answers the questions of who killed Kennedy and puts together the history of the time so you can see its relevance to today.
Now, before we go to the mobsters, E. Howard Hunt,
yes,
the name associated with Watergate, allegedly, and I want to see if you checked this out, I haven't seen your book yet, allegedly E. Howard Hunt told his own son, yes, I was there, and this was the big plot to kill Kennedy. Did you ever check that part out?
Yes, I write about it extensively.
All right, okay. So Hunt did say that to his own son.
Yes, and it's true, and Hunt was telling the truth finally. Hunt, remember, back in Guatemala, he was the planner of this coup, created the false army. E. Howard Hunt created the same invading false army, CIA-funded, in the Bay of Pigs over Cuba. E. Howard Hunt played a role in Watergate. He was faking, he worked in the White House, was doing the burglaries. He was faking cables to blame the killing of the murder of Diem, who was a prime minister, a president of Vietnam, and the same month Jack Kennedy was killed. He was trying to blame that on Jack Kennedy. Kennedy actually ordered the Diem not be killed, and the CIA did it anyway. And then, through Watergate, at the end of his life, E. Howard Hunt finally admits that he was one of the key planners of the Kennedy assassination. He lists people within the CIA who worked with him and the mob to kill Kennedy. And E. Howard Hunt was telling the truth.
Many years ago, I interviewed Giancana's son. Now, Giancana was the head of the mob in Chicago and was suspected of being involved in this. The kid who went straight, he did not go into the mobs. He was a certified public accountant, as I recall.
Right.
And you know about this guy too, apparently.
Yes.
This guy told me. He said my father told him. He told me that the mob was involved in killing Kennedy, and he told me why, which we don't have to go into now, but I'm sure you will. Go ahead. Talk about the mob.
Kennedy, yes, Giancana confessed. There's tape recordings of Giancana confessing to his involvement in killing Kennedy. Three of the mobsters, top mobsters, Santos Traficante Jr. in Tampa, and Carlos Marcello in New Orleans. Marcello also was in prison, and there's taped confessions by Marcello admitting his role in killing Kennedy. The mob had turned on Kennedy. Kennedy, and I tell a story in the book that people don't know, going back to the McClellan Committee hearings in 1957, when the Western mobs, the Elkins family, gave the Kennedys the information about the Teamsters being infiltrated by the mob, and the Kennedys went to war with the Elkins family on the Eastern mobs. The mobs, the Catholics and Jews, Chicago, New Orleans, Meyer Lansky in Florida, who had maintained the casinos in Cuba, because Joe Kennedy, in bootlegging a mobster himself, had never been accepted by the Eastern mob. And when Bobby Kennedy was Attorney General, that vendetta continued, because Bobby Kennedy was systematically prosecuting the mob, even though the mob, Giancana family in Chicago, had helped Jack Kennedy win the 1960 election by stealing the number of votes in Cook County they needed to swing the election.
Okay, this is what the son of Giancana told me. Is he still around, by the way?
I don't know, but I do know the story is true. This also fits into the record. I cite the the Warren Commission suppressed all this information, but there was a House committee under Louis Stokes in the 70s who produced and developed a lot of the information on the mob. And the mob's involvement in the Kennedy assassination is clear. What is not realized is how extensively the mob and the CIA were working together. Robert Kennedy even had the mob and the CIA with plots to try to kill Castro.
Right, I think that's all been pretty much documented, right?
It's all documented.
Yeah.
And Johnny Rosselli of the mob was kind of the key operative guy. He also went back with the Kennedy family, initially a supporter. Johnny Rosselli back in the pre-war period through the 50s and 60s. Jack Kennedy, before he married Jacqueline, had this tendency. He run off with other women and get married to them. And Johnny Rosselli annulled at least one of those marriages for Joe Kennedy. But yet, when the mob turned on Jack Kennedy, Rosselli worked as an operative to help put the hit team together in Dallas.
So we're running short on time.
Yes.
You say Oswald probably didn't pull the trigger.
No.
Who did, and where were they?
A combination. I named several of the hit people. I mean, Roscoe White, who was posing as a Dallas policeman that day, could be seen in the pictures after the event. It was identified by Beverly Oliver, who was she was a singer at Jack Ruby's club, as having been there that day. She thought he was one of the assassins. There was an international assassin from the Corsican drug trade, where the CIA and the criminals in Vietnam, as early as 1963, were beginning to export drugs from Vietnam through Marseille, the French connection. This well-known French assassin from Corsica, French-Italian, was picked up in Dallas that day by U.S. authorities and deported, not kept, not investigated. And I'm sure he was there to help organize the assassins team as well. But the key story here is that the Dulles family, which goes back to helping Hitler rise to power, which the Dulles family and George Bush's, the progenitors of the Bush family, Prescott Bush and George Herbert Walker, part of the Harriman Brothers firm, going back in the 30s, financed Hitler. And what Dulles wanted to do, that Kennedy would not go along with, is use military power to fight wars on a CIA lie that were not about national security interests, but were about economic interests. And when Kennedy realized this in Laos, he would not commit troops. When Kennedy realized this in Vietnam, that he was being lied to by the CIA, Kennedy was pulling troops out of Vietnam. He was he had sworn after Bay of Pigs he was going to break up the CIA into 1,000 pieces, and he would not fight CIA-inspired wars based on lies. And this was, again, for the Dulles family, from the New World Order group that was putting in this alternative idea of America, was counter to the direction they wanted to go, which was including happening today, continuing to use U.S. military on false flag wars where the real purpose is, oil in the Middle East. Where were the WMDs, the weapons of mass destruction, Saddam Hussein was supposed to have? And in Syria, with their chemical gas attacks, why doesn't the UN blame them on Assad? But yet the drums get beaten here in the United States, and the frenzy gets going, just like it did with Lyndon Johnson on the Tonkin Gulf incident in Vietnam, which was a complete lie, fabrication. The ship, the Maddox, was in the Tonkin Gulf as an intelligence ship, and it was not attacked by torpedo boats from Vietnam. But yet Johnson used that as Lyndon Johnson as a pretext to go into Vietnam.
Dr. Corsi, our time is up. What a shame. We still have so much to talk about.
It's a fascinating story.
It really is. Now tell them how to get the book. Is it available now?
Yeah, the book is it's Who Really Killed Kennedy.
All right.
And it's by me, Jerome Corsi, Corsi, and it's available everywhere. It should be in the bookstores, and Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, the WorldNet Daily, where I'm a senior staff reporter, WND.com, Superstore has copies as well.
Well, I'm going to get mine, and then when I've read it, I will give you a call back. And then I also, Dr. Corsi and I talked about this before the start of the show, I want to explore with him something that I recently stumbled on. And I do mean stumbled on, and that is the enormous influence of the Saudi Arabian government on our government.
Well, it even fits into this story. It's more economic power for which we use our military, lying to the American people that it's about freedom in the Middle East.
Aren't most wars fought about lies?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And in fact, Jack Kennedy wouldn't do it.
Well, good for him. God rest his soul. Thank you, Dr. Corsi.
Okay, great.
Jerome Corsi is an interesting guy. For a Harvard graduate especially, you usually think of them as being part of the establishment. Jerome Corsi, as we can tell from this show from 2013 that we heard today, very anti-establishment. A very controversial topic. Some people come down on the side of the government and say, my government would never do that. Others say what Jerome Corsi said today. Don't necessarily trust everything coming out of Washington. Join us tomorrow for Dr. Robert Heinemann live in the studio talking current events. And then we'll have more Kevin Dorn shows. That'll be next week. It's AM 1480 WLEA Hornell. I'm Brian O'Neill.